Well, welcome back, everybody, to what is going to be a truly special episode of Tech Whispers. My guest today is going to help you get insights into the playbook needed for the modern era. In past times, we were taught, go gather the facts, build a plan, and then we move from there. But the AI era, these times turn that playbook upside down. Today, the future isn't discovered by leaders who wait for certainty. We just know this. Times are very uncertain, but it is discovered by those leaders who know how to move, build momentum, get people in motion. Successful organizations today aren't just adapting for the future, they're actually drawing the map that others are going to eventually follow. My guest today is one of those very, very special leaders leading that type of business impacting, moat building transformation for their company. Marianne Johnson is Chief Product Officer, and we'll talk about her role here in a minute. Very, very diverse and wide, holistic role. She's been with Cox Automotive for several years now and just writing an amazing story. So, Marianne, let's dive in. And first, I've got to start with a little confession. So, I've never shared this with you, but the first time we met was at Keith Ferrazzi's Radical Innovator Summit. It was New York last year. And we ended up at a breakout table discussion with some other great leaders and didn't have a lot of time. But I remember coming away thinking, one day I'm going to unpack this amazing person's story on Tech Whispers. And so today's that day. I could not be more excited. And, I just want to welcome you. We've got an amazing community here. They lean in, they listen, they play these over and over again because they're so good. But anyways, welcome to the show, Marianne.
Thank you. When I heard Keith call you that day, the Tech Whisperer, I thought, okay, that's a really special label. He must have some pixie dust. And I thought to myself, I need to meet him. And then we ended up at the same table later that day. And so what was special to me is some connections crystallize like right away. And that moment did. So thank you for that.
The whole vision of Tech Whispers, I'm actually not the Tech Whisperer. It's you all. Like you and Leanne Russell from BNY. She was on the show not too long ago. You're the Tech Whisperers. I just get to shine the light on you all. So, but thanks for being here. I know you are running 800 hours a week, a lot going on. And so thanks for taking the time. And, I would say, just to kind of jump in, every transformation, every great transformation especially, begins with a decision to move, right? Before the destination is really clear and visible. And, how do you create that visibility, build a conviction, and not for yourself, but for thousands of other people that have got to go on this journey with you?
Yeah, I was thinking, I continually think about this and think about the journey that I've just spent time with all my leaders this week of where that journey's going next. I think you have to have an innate belief in what is possible. I also think you have to be willing and be intentional about suspending your filters from all your experiences and think what the biggest, craziest outcome possible is as a starting point. You look for signals, you find those signals and those early proof points that something is changing or can change. And then I always think about just stepping out, put yourself in motion. You hear a lot of leaders that are really driving innovation talk about working backwards. And one of my favorite words is mechanize. I think you then need to start to mechanize it, set goals that put the possible into action. And I just had a one-on-one a few minutes ago with one of my leaders, and we were talking about how do you push the boundaries and set things that almost feel impossible, but then you're doing that based on those signals that I talked about. And those signals allow you to then start saying, okay, what is the first step towards something that you could do and something that could be possible? I believe that momentum feeds momentum. And then if you get wins along the way, that gives you reasons to believe, and that gives you reasons to reach to that crazy, amazing outcome. And people want to be part of something that's bigger than themselves. I really believe that that's true for everybody. They want to belong. They want to say, I was part of that. And then people will follow that. They'll move to those steps forward. They'll gain confidence. And then they'll start seeing things that maybe you didn't even see that were possible. And I think that momentum feeds momentum is something. And I always ask the question, why not? And
Yeah.
that really, it starts to create that transformation opportunity.
We could all go home right now. We just got all the price of admission right here already. Because so many organizations are struggling. They don't have that kind of momentum, that clarity. They're not seeing the signals, and it's really an interesting time. So yeah, I want to go deeper. When I build these podcasts, I do a lot of research. You know that, and I always like to try to find some sort of a metaphor or something that fits my guess. And recently, Dave Burns from GE Aerospace, I talked about the bison, how the bison charges into the turmoil, the storm, where everyone else goes the other way. And so for you, I just kept coming back to explore. And, Lewis and Clark, obvious choice. They had no map. There was no map yet. Jefferson couldn't give them a map, right? It wasn't there. But I dug deeper, and then I thought, Ernest Shackleton, right? That story is amazing of what he did. And I love how, I'm going to read this because here's the job ad, right? Here's what he said to get people to go on this probably suicide mission. He's like, men wanted for hazardous journey, small wages, bitter cold, long months of complete darkness, constant danger, safe, return is doubtful, honor and recognition in case of success. Would you sign up for that, Marianne? I mean, come on, that's crazy.
I think my pitch might have been different.
Might have had a little different spin on it, but we know that the rest is history. But then I found my person, Gertrude Bell. Most people are going to want to go research her. One of history's greatest cartographers, right? And I did have to go look that up. But anyways, she wasn't celebrated, Marianne, because she explored uncharted territory, which she did. She became legendary because she drew the maps that made the unknown navigable for everyone else. That is you to a T. It just hit me right there. I'm like, this is Gertrude Bell. And so I won't call you Gertrude, I promise. But you've consistently throughout your career taken uncertainty and you've made the path. You've led the transformation. Like you said, you've found the signals, you built momentum, with people and products and teams, entire organizations. So let me ask you this. Has the role of today's enterprise leader evolved from building great functions to becoming a cartographer of change?
I would say 100%. If they can step back and realize the magnitude of the change and the enormous opportunity in front of them, maybe define it as transformative enterprise leader. Because I still think that, what they've done in the past is relevant, but at this point in time, it is orders of magnitude different. And I love that you found Gertrude Bell because most people stop at the explorers. And it's interesting when you think about that. Lewis and Clark, Shackleton, they were the ones that we romanticized, but nobody in that expedition tent was better than 6 months later. It's better off 6 months later than when just because somebody had bravely walked into the unknown. What actually changed things was the map that came after. That's the shift that I think I've been living. Early in my career, leadership meant that the best builder in the room, the strongest product instinct, the cleanest architecture, the sharpest model, that's the explorer work. You were rewarded for how far you personally get into that unfamiliar terrain. But when you're responsible for product engineering, data science, security, the back office IT all at once, and AI shows up and rewrites that terrain under every one of those functions simultaneously. I'm going to say that again. When AI shows up and rewrites the terrain under every one of those functions simultaneously, being the best explorer stops being the job. None of those teams are exploring the same unknown. Engineering is worried about how AI changes what is done means. Data science is worrying about the model risk. Security is worried about the threat surface that didn't exist 18 months ago, or even what just changed probably 90 days ago. The back office IT is worried about what breaks if it doesn't scale. And each of them is standing on their own edge of the map. But if you just go explore faster than they do, you're potentially making things worse. And I've created more unmapped territory, not less. So the job does become the cartography, not I found a path, but here's the terrain and here's what the real risk is. And where is it actually safe to move fast? And in creating a shared language, so product, security, data science, they're reading the same map instead of 5 different ones. So Gertrude Bell didn't get remembered, I think, for reaching a place first, like you talked about. She got remembered because after her, other people could go there without dying. Right? And that's the test that I'm trying to hold myself to now. Not did I personally push into the AI frontier, but 6 months from now, can people that I lead move through that same terrain confidently without me in the room? If they can, then I did my job. If they still need me to lead every expedition, I really didn't draw the map yet. So I've just taken a really good walk. So this map is for Cox Automotive, but I believe that it transcends Cox Automotive and automotive in general. I think it really applies everywhere with your own context and your vision for what's possible in the world in which that we are operating or that you're operating today.
I think we're getting a really good sense of why Cox Automotive is so far ahead. We call it the proverbial moat, right? And so maybe just say a few words about the business. The business is very fascinating company. And also, would you also just give us the highlight of your remit, your role? I want to go deeper on the article we're going to write later, but maybe just share some of the background, just kind of stepping back.
Yeah, if you're listening and you're not familiar with who Cox Automotive is, we are a division under Cox Enterprises, which is a very large family-owned, privately held business. And it's one of the most amazing companies on this planet. The leadership here, the family, it's a 127-plus-year-old company that was started by Governor Cox with Dayton Daily News. And it has continued to reinvent the company over and over and over again as signals change. When you go from newspapers to radio to television to the internet to cable to broadband to where automotive started. If you think about Auto Trader, it started used to sell cars in the newspaper. And, and you would list your car in a newspaper, and I'm old enough to remember that. But then you take that and you create listings, and then you create magazines, and then the magazine goes online, So it's just been a fascinating business where we sell SaaS software to every part of the automotive industry, whether it's a dealer, a lender, a manufacturer, a fleet owner. And we also have a wholesale business where we move more metal than anybody on the planet. But we do that with it being digitally engaged and AI first, so tech enabled. And then we have a fleet business that is also, it provides fleet services across the industry to manage their fleets, make sure their fleets stay up. And then we also have roadside repair. So we're also physical. We have a lot of physical, but all driven through data and technology. We do EV battery remanufacturing. So there's a large scope. And I guess if I anchor anything on that before I talk about my role, is what makes this company so special to me is the culture. I never, ever have to worry when I go to sleep at night that this company isn't going to be doing the right thing for their employees, for the community, for the greater world. If you go look at Cox Conserves and the other businesses that we have with, under roof, largest vertical farmer, our clean tech industry, OpenGov, Axios News. It's just an incredible array and growing of businesses where we're working to make an impact and make the world a better place. And a lot of people can have really interesting value props that they talk about. But if you live it and how you show up and where you place your investment, that's really something special. So all that said, in my 37-year plus career, having this role at that kind of a company makes it pretty amazing. So I've had the opportunity to lead all of the functions. So I have product strategy, product management, software engineering, all of data science. I have the back office IT, and I have security in one organization. And what an amazing journey we've been on in the past 8 years that I've been here. But what's so really exciting about it is all the foundation work that we did and having it together is giving us this massive jump off point for what's changing with agentic AI, because all those roles are more independent than they've ever been and blurring. The work is changing. The building mindset and who can build is changing immediately. So that's my scope, and that's what I'm after.
Yeah, so that's what you do in the mornings. What do you do in the afternoons, Marianne? So
Is
I've got
there
a
an afternoon? It's a blur.
yeah, I know. It's I've got a number of some of my favorite Marianne isms.
Oh no.
Those expressions that you use. That I mean, you've got a lot of them. I can only have enough time for a few. But before we go there, I think it'd be a good time to pull in our first mystery guest, mystery questioner, and someone who's seen firsthand how you operate, has worked closely with you. So listen in, you're gonna know who this is right away.
I've known Marianne probably close to 2 decades. She's an inspiring leader that really gets the best out of everyone around her. But I think her superpower is really the ability to connect the dots, understand the strategic implications of the decision, then put those together into an action plan and bring other people along, inspire other people to come along with her on that journey to get great things done. On top of that, she's an incredible hard worker. But her superpower is connecting the dots and making something come alive for real on a commercial basis.
Do you know
Who
who
is
that
that?
is? That is the CEO of Deluxe, Mr. Barry McCarthy. One of the most amazing leaders that I've ever had the opportunity to work for in my career. So I love that he made that, and he has that same superpower, by the way.
He's pretty special, and we're
He
gonna,
is.
your colleague Yogs, who works with Barry now. We're gonna be featuring Yogs later, and the great American success story that Deluxe is. So
Yes.
yeah, good stuff. Yeah, so have some fun with that question. That's a great superpower.
Yeah, it's interesting when you think about, you go back and you think about what are your top gifts, and how do you maximize your top gifts and recognizing what those are. And then you kind of like study how did that become a gift? What was innate and what did you nurture over time? And for me, connecting the dots, I do think somehow, however I'm wired, and then the jobs that I've had over time have allowed me to take pretty complex opportunities or challenges and see the salient points that need to be brought together to get to an outcome. And I've always been outcome focused. It's probably also because I'm highly competitive, and I see the win pretty fast. And I can find that white space in between things and ideate on it. And then I know that I have a good sense of that, but I think my superpower is to bring other really smart people and people that are smarter than me, because there's a lot that are way smarter than me. You bring them to the table, and then you start helping, you draw the picture and you help them either challenge where you're connecting the dots or add and expand. It's an and on top of that. And then you really refine it. And that again goes back to what we talked about earlier, is that start with that connected vision, that outcome. And again, like, be bold. And then you start moving towards it. What are the first connections we need to make? Are there an order of the connections that we need to put in place in order to get to the next set of connections that drive a next level outcome? But it is something that I have worked on over the years, to be able to step back and say, what are we really trying to accomplish, and what are the building blocks that need to get there? So I love that Barry felt that way. We did a lot of amazing things together to do that. And I always have Barry in my head. I'm sure he would love this when he goes back and listens to this. But he would say, Marianne, you can see the outcome and the connected dots faster than most. Make sure you always bring people with you, because it might be really simple for you to see it, and it might not be as simple for other people to see it. So you got to tell the story and draw the picture and invite them in.
Great coaching. And like you say, not everyone knows those gifts, right? They don't have that self-awareness, and how do you maximize it if you don't know it? So thank you so much, Barry. I mean, he just had bored me. He's just, like every CEO, he's running like crazy. So appreciate him. And, I was thinking as you were talking about how, connecting the dots, being competitive, I was thinking about you being more than 30 years playing competitive soccer.
Yeah.
And I wonder if you were a defender. And by the way, I did a little research, but what was your nickname in soccer? Yeah, I mean, you're this very nice, gentle, calm person, but what was your nickname, Marianne?
I had quite a few because Marianne, Mary, like that. Quite a few people said nightmare because you weren't getting to my goal. You weren't getting to my goalie, and I had many, 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 many yellow cards.
Okay, yeah.
I only had one. I deserved one red card. But yeah, that was one of my nicknames.
Well, as a former goalie, I appreciated the nightmare person in front of me. So good stuff.
Yeah.
Well, let's jump into some of these Marianneisms. Again, I'm a student of language. I think these things really matter because there's so much learning built into these, as you're communicating, coaching, taking people on these journeys, seeing the signals. And I think we're going to get a little sense of your inner Gertrude Bell right here. So
Okay.
my favorite one of all is start with crazy and work backwards. You will always get more accomplished than you think. I love that. Talk about that.
All right. Well, I think I don't even remember how many years ago I was listening to someone in the music industry and talking about what was possible in the music industry, and they used the word it might be crazy. And that just stuck with me. I'm like, okay, like why not? And then all the innovators would talk about like, well, think about what the outcome you want to achieve and then work backwards. And then so I kind of put those together in my own head to said, well, like, why not crazy? Because it gets people outside of their current thinking. And I talked about earlier about suspending your own filters. You got to be super intentional about that because you don't even know that you're filtering when you're filtering. And you have these synapses that have stored, filters in your head, and you have to be super intentional about breaking them down and challenging them. And so I think that allows people to start challenging stuff. And sometimes you got to make bold statements that may or may not be true and may be provocative to get people to get outside of that. And I think everybody has creativity inside of them. We all like to dream, but you got to sometimes give permission for people to dream. And I think leaders have to do that. I think sometimes we get so caught up in our own domain expertise and trying to provide the answer in the room and to prove how smart you are or what I've done in the past. And I think that can hold you back. I think you got to be willing to ask the hard questions and leave it open. I think having an approach that unlocks that and enables others to feed off of each other, I also feel like that fills part of your soul, even if you don't realize that you need it. I think it enables innovation. I also think it's addictive. I think it's something that once you start doing it, then it's hard to not do it. And sometimes you do have to rein it in. You have to be practical. You can't just be constantly thinking about the crazy and not work backwards. The work backwards part is where you start iterating and iterating. So I think you have to move from there and take action, like I talked about, test, learn, move, test, learn. And when you hit something and you go, wow, okay, we're seeing evidence that's real, then you can double down. I said, and the capabilities in our hands that we have right now with agentic AI and data and the critical visionary skills that we have, we should all really start to think about that there's an abundance mindset because there's things that we can do now that you could never do before. Even if you had the idea of something, it might have cost too much. It might have taken too long. Well, that may not be true anymore. So reimagining completely reimagining not only the outcome, but reimagining how you get to the outcome. That is possible now more than it's ever been before. So what a time. What a time to be in business, and what a time to be alive and to be in the middle of that.
I just have so many things sparking in my head right now. You talked earlier about momentum builds momentum, right? You just talked about, I mean, in this case, addictive is a really good thing because you've got people who have ambition. They love I've met a lot of your
Yeah.
directs, and each one of them is a dream team rock star, like so good. They're so excited to be on this journey. They're working probably more than they ever imagined and
Yeah.
loving it. And, but there's something that, I forget who the quote's from, but the bigger risk is not setting the bar high and missing it. The bigger risk is setting the bar too low and hitting it. Right. And we got to
Well
really,
said.
it's just, I think about that a lot. And by the way, Marianne, when I do a lot of speaking, and my favorite walk-up song, by the way, it's Crazy Train by Ozzy. I think that is the best song for our times, and embrace the crazy, right?
Yeah.
Let's,
Embrace.
let's
Why not?
go. Let's go. Well, speaking of momentum builds momentum, I think of another Marianism, and I think it's one of the reasons why Cox Automotive is so far ahead. And so it's all about be in motion. And I think you said this earlier, define step one and go. You're all about being in motion, right? So talk about that and how that's important to the journey.
I it goes back to me personally. I'll talk a little bit about my personal journey that kind of put that as a part of my DNA. And the other night we were together at a dinner, and you got to you also asked me kind of a mystery question at dinner. But I was in a F5 tornado when I was a baby, and so I thought about that in relation to this motion question, and comically, the house exploded and I was in it, and I was carried over a mile away as an 8-month-old child, and so I was in motion early in life.
Yeah, I guess.
Surviving, it's interesting surviving at that point when I was carried that far away. And that event actually changed our life and changed the course of all the lives of my family. Many hardships, many dysfunctions came following that. But my grandmother was that rock and the most consequential and influential person in my life. And being in motion came from her. So she instilled the mental models in me continually during all the dysfunction that I was growing up in the middle of telling me, Marianne, you can figure it out. Everything is figure outable. You can figure it out. And go write it down. She would just tell me, if this is your problem, go write it down, make your list of what you think you need to do, take that first step, that first item on your list, and go do it. Like, go start right now. She would always say, be in motion. If you're sitting at it, you're staring at it, you're going to stay where you are. And so that was really ingrained with me, because when something would hit the fan, something would be scary, I would call her and she goes, okay, what are your choices? What are you going to do? And then she'd either help me put the first step in motion, or I'd put it in motion. And that changed, I think, a lot of the wiring that I have, and why I have that bias for action. And sometimes I have to hold myself back a little bit. Like, I can't be too far ahead of everyone around me. And if I feel like I'm in motion and I'm by myself in motion, especially in a business and with your peers, you got to help them be in motion with you. And so there's a whole conversation about that.
Yeah. I would have loved to met your grandmother. She sounds amazing.
Amazing.
And I love go write it down, because that really crystallizes it when we do that. I think we underestimate that. And, when we're with Keith Ferrazzi, he always is saying, we act our way to new thinking. We don't think our way to new acting.
Wow, I'm going to have to rewrite that one down, share that
Yeah.
one.
Yeah. I'll
There's a
send it
lot
to
of
you.
Ferrazziisms as well.
A lot of Ferrazziisms. Yes. He's got a bunch of good ones. We obviously we're in this intelligence era, this AI era, and you've got some great Marianneisms around that I think are part of your secret sauce. And so I combined three of them into one. So just given time. So one part would be being AI first is an operational reality. A second would be, you've alluded to earlier, AI today should give you an abundance mindset. And then AI sounds like tech, but it starts, and you probably would say it starts and ends with people.
I totally agree. I would even put that one first, because you know we need to be super intentional with this technology that is just a tectonic plate shift of what's possible in every aspect of every role of every business of every vertical in the globe. And people should be guiding it. People should be governing it. People should have a future with it. And we need to retain what is important to us as far as the human at the center, the heart of who we are, and make sure that the outcomes that we achieve through this incredible breakthroughs are the outcomes that we want. And then when you start thinking about that and how that applies in your business and your day-to-day life and your personal life, I think it needs to be guided by core principles of how a business wants to lead, what their ethos is, and how they do that with their talent, which is their biggest treasure. And I think that's true in life as well.
Brilliant. Yeah, thank you for that. And I think it's a good lead into our next mystery guest, next mystery questioner. You talk a lot about starting with people. You talk a lot about culture, culture matters, about the things to be intentional about. And so, I took the liberty of reaching out to some people who have had a front row seat, who have been in the trenches with you. And so they're going to prove or disprove, okay, through their mystery questions. And I think we know where this is going to go. But so please allow me to introduce our next mystery guest, and you can have some fun with his brilliant question.
So, MJ, one of your, I'd say, understated superpowers is that you have this ability to develop relationships that are real all the way down to the ground floor of your organization. You seem to know everyone, you know something about them, and then crucially, you leverage those relationships to make you a better leader. Sometimes this is by having a pulse on what's working and what's not working in the organization. It's by having a bead on where the talent is, where there are opportunities to improve. This is a superpower that you have. And I'm curious, do you have that innately, or did you cultivate it, this ability to build those relationships so far down in the organization? Was that modeled for you somehow by one of your leaders? And then what advice would you have for folks who want to emulate that approach, but struggle to prioritize it into their busy days?
Yeah, so that was Chris Dillon. He is one of my most strategic leaders that are driving a good portion of our AI transformation, and has been here on the journey that I've been here at Cox. Chris and I actually share something that grounds us in this particular superpower, and that is our faith. Both Chris and I are very faith-based individuals, and it really kind of anchors our life and how we go about our life in the day-to-day. And so when he talks about those relationships, I think it's a love for people. And if you have a love for people, you're genuinely interested, and you care about the outcomes for those around you and those that are in your circle and beyond your circle. And so I genuinely, personally, and selfishly, to be honest, I get my energy, I get my motivation, I get my why from seeing other people thrive. And if you're listening and that is not something you've really anchored in on in your life, I would ask you to think about it, because once you start doing that and building authentic relationships, what you get back is way, 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 way more than you're giving out. It's a principle that works, and no matter who you are. And so I also remind myself, I'm 61, and I think about when I started my career, I've worked my way through every company, every job, walking through a door, saying I'll take on more. And I'm not any different than anybody else in my organization. I've been where they are. We've all made different choices, but that person is a real person with real skills, real needs, real life challenges outside of themselves. And when you connect on that level, you can get a different outcome for yourself personally and for your organization, and you can pour yourself into those other people. Now, I did have this modeled. Chris asked, was it innate? And did I learn? I do think some of it was innate, where I'm wired, where I like being around people. I enjoy it. I get energy from it. But I also think I saw it modeled. I had two leaders that I would call out that shaped that early in my career. One was a gentleman by the name of Steve Heinzman. That was probably the first leader that I worked for that made me realize, wow, I could have a career and I'm not limited by anything but myself. And the second leader who modeled what Chris is talking about was a gentleman by the name of Bill Catucci. When I was at Equifax, I still think about what would Bill do. But let me just describe an experience with Bill. Bill came in as the president at the time of Equifax, and he didn't really need to work. He was there at the time to go make an impact. And when Bill would walk into any of the buildings, he had this ability to go in and meet Dan. He would talk to Dan in a minute, and he would look you in the eye, and he was fully present. Fully present, even if it was for a minute, he was fully present. And he would ask you about yourself, what you were working on, something that you were passionate about, maybe something personal, and he would remember it. If he saw you 6 months later, he remembered your name, he remembered what you shared, and he would ask you about it. And it didn't matter who you were. It didn't matter if you were a leader or whether you were the janitor or somewhere in the middle of what was going on in the organization. It didn't matter who you were. It was that you were a person and you had value. When he would show up in the building, and back then we did have some rudimentary instant messenger, somebody would put on there that Bill was in the building. People would get up intentionally out of their cubicle and just walk around to see if they could see him or if they could interact with him, because it was that special. And it stuck with me. It stuck with me to say, I want to have that impact on somebody. And if you were in a meeting and he called out your name and said something about you and what you're doing, the moment that you had with that, God, you wanted to do that again. And then you wanted to do it for somebody else. And so I saw it modeled at the highest level. I saw him get leaders to work together that would normally not want to work together. I can remember him saying, and I'll make up the names to protect the innocent, but he would say, Joe and Sam, you two are so aligned and you're going to get this thing done and you're going to do it faster than anybody could ever do it. And they're going to come back and show us how it's done. Where maybe Joe and Sam really didn't like each other and didn't get along. And Bill would put it in a situation where it created a dynamic like they were going to figure it out because Bill declared it. It was magic.
Amazing.
And so
Yeah.
to answer Chris's question, it comes from a place of love. It comes from a place of what fuels me and my greater personal purpose. And then I have seen it modeled. And I think the last thing I'd say is you have to be super intentional about it every day. And so he asked the question, what is your advice for somebody who's trying to prioritize that in a busy day? I may work longer hours because of that, but that's a choice. And it's a choice that I choose to make. And I just left the meeting yesterday with 60 of my top leaders across my org. And the last thing I told them to do is practice gratitude. And every single day, find at least one person to share your gratitude for them and why. And be intentional about that. And I think it goes back to intentionality and how do you bring that human connection into what you do and not just what's on your plate to get done.
Marianne, with your permission, I'd like to take this segment we just talked about and turn it into a mini podcast because we struggle in this industry, this profession, to we all know it. We all know we've got to be better at relationships, and it's one of the biggest hindrances, right? But and I'm going to make you very uncomfortable right now, but I'm going to say it anyways. I'm going to predict right now there's so many people today, and even more so in the future, when they get into the hard spots, they're going to say, "What would Marianne do?" And because you're teaching and you're caring for these people, and so I love it. I love it. Well, thank you, Chris, and thank you, Marianne, for sharing your faith journey as part of that too. And we've got another mystery questioner coming on the heels of Chris's. Someone also who's been in the trenches with you, and I think it's going to just shine the light on you in some different ways. Again, it's one of those meaty questions. Deeply personal because of this person loves you very much and it would go to war with you any day of the week. So let's roll the tape on this one.
There are two superpowers that stand out for me with Marianne. One is the lightning pace she sets in problem solving. She is a maximizer at her core who wouldn't want to be on her team or her peer, or for that matter, her boss. And two, the continuous and contagious push she makes in leaning into all things new. And this applies to both people, process, and technology. When I think about how these two superpowers show up together, it's supercharged for sure, just like Marianne. And I can hear her favorite quote playing in my head on repeat: everything rises or falls on leadership. You should definitely get Marianne to share her perspective on how important strong peer relationships are in the problem-solving process, especially when the problem is complex or the stakes are high for peers or high for the organization.
Yeah, so that is the unforgettable Elaine Baker, who I had the pleasure to work with side by side at U.S. Bank, and also probably my partner in crime. Our CEO probably didn't want us sitting side by side, and I couldn't always sit across from her because she'd get me in trouble with reactions. But like it's one of those connections where you work with somebody and you get a lot done, and then they become a forever friend. So I love that you talked to Elaine, talking about dynamic people. We went through a lot of things together and transformed in a very competitive space in payments. And it's interesting too, when you build relationships, going back to the point we just made about relationships, nobody gets anything done alone. It isn't, and leadership is a team sport. It is absolutely a team sport. And so an executive leadership team, any group of leaders, and I'll even step back and say one more definition of leadership. I don't always think leadership, and it's not hierarchical. Yes, you have hierarchical leadership structures, but every individual is a leader, because if you're engaged in the act of influencing the thinking, the behavior of someone else, you're engaged in the act of leadership. And so I always go back to John Maxwell's book, The 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership. And there's a law in there of law of influence. And in order to have have influence, you have to have a relationship to have powerful influence. And you build a relationship by spending time. And you spend time, you do things for each other. Like, I want to have my team members' backs. I want to push times if I need to push, or I want to be there when they need me to, and I'm willing to step in and do something for them. And I think that gets hard in the trenches, because there are times where you have what my husband quoted years ago, intense moments of fellowship. You might not be aligned on something, or you may be, like Barry said, Marianne, you're over here and your peer is somewhere else. But you have to invest the time to get aligned. You have to invest the time to share your vision. And if you don't get that vision aligned, you're going to have a really hard time. And sometimes you have to model the way, and you have to show what's possible. And that's been something in my career that we're doing it here at Cox. It's been at other places where I'm willing to disrupt myself. I'm willing to disrupt my own function and show what's possible, and bring folks with me, and then be a partner to help them any way I can to do the same in their function. And very rarely in any business do functions stand alone and are not dependent on each other, right? It goes back to no individual does anything alone, no leader does anything alone, and no business doesn't have interdependencies across how they run. And so I think it's a have to. It's a have to be a maximizer. I think you have to lean in to those relationships. It's not an option. Now, how you do it can be destructive and can be could be the limiter to a business's success. It could be a limiter to a team's success. And so having the right people in the right chairs that have the right mindset around leadership matters.
We're getting some of the how now, which is really helpful in terms of how you execute these great things. And so, Elaine, thank you so much. She's just a hoot. I love talking with her, and she's got a big job now at the world's #1 payment company, which is so impressive. And you made me think of, there's an African proverb which is, we go faster alone, but we go further together. And it just kind of aligns with your philosophy. But on the topic of Africa, Elaine mentioned something about some nonprofit work that you did together. And she also said to ask you about a certain young man in Africa. Can you tell the story about this certain young man?
I can. So at US Bank, we had a Women Leaders in Action group where we raised money to the tune of about half a $500,000 a year. And we invested that money in Africa because it was one continent that we were not in from a business perspective. So we didn't want to pick a country that we had people in. We wanted to be somewhere where we weren't. And so we invested in Kenya, and specifically in Nairobi, into a school as one of the areas that we invested. We also invested out with a Maasai tribe and building a girls' dormitory where girls would get to go to school, because in Africa, many young girls, as soon as they turn the age of 11, 12, they drop out of school. And we proved to the tribal leaders that if you educate your women, you educate your young girls, the impact to that tribe would be lifelong and forever. So in that, the very first trip that we went to Kenya, and we were hands-on. We just didn't send money over. We were very hands-on. I met a young man by the name of Reagan. He was an orphan. Both his parents had died of AIDS at age 5. And so he was living on a trash dump, literally. And one of the principals of a school, when I say school, was more of a shanty. If you saw pictures, anybody should be visiting third world countries to realize the difference in life that we have here in the U.S. But I met Reagan. I don't remember how old he was. It feels like he was like 12. And the way the principal talked about him is that he was a natural born leader, where he was mentoring other students. He was the top of his class. And I thought to myself, this young man, if we change his life, the lives that he's going to change is going to be immeasurable. And so we bought him a laptop. He picked up on it very quickly. And I was able to personally start funding portions of his things. Another amazing lady paid for his school. And you had to pay for school to go to school there. You had to pay for uniforms to go to school. But I was able to buy all his supplies. I remember the first time he asked me for something. He asked me for a CD of this gentleman that he had heard of named Martin Luther King. And he asked me for a Bible that was in English and Swahili. It was the only thing he asked for. And so from then on, he was able to go to this private high school. He graduated in the top 2% of his high school. He went on to college. My husband and I were able to fund his college. And so he is now a doctor in Nairobi, and his name is Reagan, and I'm super, super proud of him. He calls me Mom. And that was a journey to be able to try to guide him from afar, give him tough love when he needed it. It's a very different reality every day for a young man in Nairobi with no family and no means. And it was quite a journey. A lot of prayer.
I wish I had known this story earlier because I would have loved to have gotten a mystery question from Reagan and how special. But thank you for sharing that. Thank you for having that heart. And just think of the force multiplier, like how many people he's helping now, and a place is very underserved. So
Yeah.
yeah, you're amazing.
A
Um,
lot of
you
people
know,
around me liking Elaine.
yeah, so good. We're kind of winding down here, but I want to get to some of your other secret sauce on the journey. And one is your how you've phrased the journey. You've had these chapters in the journey. You just didn't flick a switch one day and you're this amazing AI transformative company, business impacting company. So you've had these convictions, these expressions. One was you were data first, AI enabled, which is really maybe stop and think. But now more recently you kind of take it to a different level. So what's that look like, Marianne?
Yeah, well, I'm really glad that we had that right order of data first, AI enabled before agentic hit, because having your data house in order enables a lot of things. I do believe that innovation comes from information, and data really fuels innovation and it fuels differentiation. And so we've been super intentional about that at this company. And I think every company needs to be super intentional about what their new moat is. And so when agentic hit, which was an interesting story when we first saw semblances of agentic capabilities, the models came out, 4 years ago, and they were interesting. You could generate some interesting content. You could start to do some interesting things as far as knowledge repositories and information back out because of the processing compute amount of time and the amount of data that was available. Those two things hit a tipping point for generative. But then when agentic hit, we really realized something was different. And so we said, okay, we need to figure that out. And before we declared a different phrase from data first, AI enabled, we had to prove out what agentic really could do. And I just tell a story. We were super blessed that we were in a corporate jet on our way back from reInvent with my leadership team. We literally turned all the chairs sideways and we basically had a conference room on the plane. And we said, okay, this is potentially game changing, life changing, world changing. We think something's here. Let's go figure it out. Let's test it. And we immediately stood up. We made decisions on that plane. The whole 4-hour flight back was going back to say, okay, what could this be? And then, okay, if we think it is what we're seeing it is, what are the possibilities? And we sat and dreamed for about an hour. And Chris Dillon would tell you this story. We then turned around and said, okay, what do we do about it? What is our list? What is our first step? And so we picked 2 steps. And the first 2 steps were we were going to stand up an agentic incubator, and we were going to solicit use cases across the business. And this was over 2 years ago. What were the business cases or opportunities, problems and opportunities in the business and across the company? And we set a criteria for it, but we stood up very quickly out of the data science team and we started testing and building. And we started seeing results like right away. And so that was the first step, the first item. The second item is we decided, okay, if we're going to build with this, we have to have a point of view of how this changes what we build and how we build it. So we started creating a point of view and we stood up a lab that said, what is our next generation reference architecture that's agentic? What does that mean? What does it look like? What are all the things you have to account for? Because nothing changed from the things you have to account for today. Systems have to stay up. They have to be secure. If you're going to build agents, how do you know what an agent is doing? How do you track an agent? All of the things that you have to account for. And we started creating a point of view, filling it out, deciding what we had to build ourselves, what wasn't there, picking very strategic partners. And that started moving those needles. And as we started seeing real results, we started sharing those. You've heard me tell kind of the shock and awe stories where we would build some things so fast that were so crazy. We'd show our team. We'd build stuff in front of our executive team so that they had a feel for, oh my gosh, this isn't just a phase. It would start to demystify it and make it very real. And as that became very real and we started seeing results, my CEO, Steve Rowley, who is a growth driver and a visionary, said, okay, what does this mean? And we sat down and talked about it and said, this means that we want to be AI first, not data first. We want to be AI first and data differentiated. And it changed the way, because we believe the moat is still your context. We believe the moat is still your data. And that has proven out to be true over these 2 years with this big agentic tectonic plate shift. But you have to have an agentic mindset first to be able to realize the benefits of that. And I think that we've got that right. Are we perfect where we are right now? No, we're iterating and driving value, dropping value, learning, dropping value, and in motion. But that was a big shift. And when you declare that, and you declare it as a leader, going back, everything rises and falls on leadership. When your CEO and your leadership team declares that, that puts a lot in motion. And that allows people to start realizing, okay, something's changing here, and what's my role in it, and where are we going?
Just three quick thoughts, Marianne. One is, you are really helping us see the new playbook for these times, right? Everyone knows that their old playbooks aren't working. You hear a lot of people doing AI restarts because they stumbled. So that's point number one. Point number two is, for all leaders out there, even at the C level, what I really heard going on there on that plane was great questions. And the team was so good that you didn't have to even be the one asking all the questions. They knew the questions to ask and then took action. And then my third learning is, we all need to spend more time in the corporate jet. I definitely heard that right.
That's
right
called
there.
super blessed. It doesn't happen all the time, but when it does, it's life-changing.
Amazing. Got a couple more mystery questioners for you. Here's someone that has been with you a long time, has seen you in action in multiple environments, situations, and super special question coming up here. So tune in.
I have had the pleasure of working with you and witnessing your leadership over many years. One of the things that stands out to me is how quickly you absorb information and translate that information into actionable plans. That characteristic of your leadership stands out and is critical in times of monumental change that significantly disrupts the status quo. As the saying goes, everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face. As a leader of your caliber, who is always leading from the front, you have inevitably been thrown a curveball that has caused the need to pivot. How do you approach this aspect of leadership when the cost of pivoting is likely significant?
Well, that is Miss Shauna Easley, who I think I hired her after maybe her second job ever at Equifax. And I have brought her to every company that I have been at except for one. And the one was probably not a fit for anybody that I loved. But she has some pixie dust. She does. I've never seen anybody be able to manage and coach and encourage anybody at any level from where she sits. So Shauna's something special. The question is like how, just it's interesting about being punched in the face. I've had some peers, I've had some CEOs, I've had some experiences where, I wasn't working for the best leader. I didn't have the best peer group that was operating from the same core principles and values. And you're always gonna, people are complex. Environments are complex. And you have to figure out how to navigate those. And sometimes, you don't get a win out of the gate. And sometimes things are harder than they should be. And when they are, you have a choice. And you have a choice to how you choose to react. And for me, I think there's a tenacity around finding a way to get to the outcome and there's not a single path. And so I think sometimes you have to step back and reevaluate what is happening around you when you do feel like you're getting punched in the face or you're getting blocked from getting to, an outcome, or maybe even the way you need to get to an outcome. And I think you have to constantly reevaluate your landscape. I think you need to understand your landscape. I think every company has a different culture, and cultures shift inside companies based on leaders. I mean, I've worked at a company long enough where you had multiple CEOs, and the culture shifts, the culture changes. Hopefully the core values don't, but sometimes they do. And I think you have to really understand what makes people tick around you and what their motivations are. Figure out what their love language is, because everybody has some love language, and what motivates them. And then if you can find a point in common and you can find something that you can agree on, you can typically move forward when you get a setback or a pushback or you do get punched in the face. I also think pragmatism. While I love starting with crazy and working backwards, and I do find that white space, and Elaine talks about the maximizer, I do have this pragmatic side to me as well. And I think that pragmatic side has to say, I might have to plant seeds, I might have to water them, I might have to give some proof points, and I might have to pivot. And that's okay. And sometimes there's things that you have to let go of in the moment and then come back to it. And I think if you were, again, talking about being in your thinking chair, intentionality, you have to come up with a game plan. And I could use it in a sports analogy. You think about if you're going through the first half of the game and your team is not playing well and you have a minute to regroup and you're like, okay, we might put people in different positions. We might recognize how the other team is playing, could be your competition, and you might need to call a different gameplay, for the second half of the game. So I just thoroughly enjoyed the World Cup. And I think there are times that you got to get outside of yourself and be able to call a different play when you do get punched in the face, and be willing to get back up and keep going.
Incredible. Shauna, thank you for that very insightful question. And always the great Mike Tyson, right? What a great quote he left us with. And I love that, the tenacity, but, it takes a little pressure off, Marianne, when you say there's not a single path. Like, we don't have to figure out the thing. Like, we've got to figure out the path that works right now. So really, really great stuff there. Another mystery questioner is we've got a glimpse into your humanity in some special ways through good Dr. Reagan and, your faith and love of people and genuine love of people. This next one's really, really special and touching to me. I know it's going to be to you too. So let's listen into this one.
There's something I've always admired about you. You can set some of the most aggressive goals I've ever seen on paper, and in the very same breath, be the same person who shows up for someone going through something hard in their personal life, no questions asked. That's a rare combination of high standards and high care, and it's not something you can fake for long. So I'm curious, how do you hold both of those at once? Does driving people that hard on outcomes while also making real space for their lives ever feel like attention to you? Or has it always felt like the same job? And what do you think that combination actually does for the people who work for you?
Oh, now you're going to make me cry. Yeah, I think everybody goes through hard times. I don't think anybody ever really knows what goes on in somebody else's life until you're living in their household. And we just I pulled another Farazi Tuesday night. I just had all my 60 AVP leaders and up together, and we did the sweet and sour with the small tables. And I did what Keith did the first time I experienced that with him, is I got super vulnerable in front of my team. And I think one of my superpowers is being comfortable with being uncomfortable and being vulnerable and sharing the complexities that I've dealt with in my life and even current things that you deal with. And when you give permission to show that you're not perfect and you make mistakes, and you might have made a mistake at work and then say, oh, I got that wrong, or I missed that, or I should have done that earlier. And then when you combine these things of being able to dream big, start with crazy and work backwards, but you show that you're in the boat with your team and that you're human and you're fallible and that you care, people will move mountains for you and with you. And so when you do say we're going to go climb that mountain and we're going to do it together, they're going to go with you because they want to be with you. They want to be in the hard times with you. They want to they want to be in the celebrations with you. And you know what? Think about the number of hours in a day that you spend with the people that you work with. It is more hours often than the time that you spend with your immediate family. So they are family. They are family. And so those relationships and that I've built over the years, they don't end because you're at a different company. I continue to invest. But when I have that moment, and I've had moments that people show up for you, and you have to do the same. And at the end of the day, I care more about the person than I care about anything else. And if you do that first and it shows up in the day-to-day, and people read authenticity. I mean, people know if you're sincere, and it shows up in the moments that nobody sees. And it shows up in the moments of how you help your peer navigate a challenge. And when you do that I think allows you to push the envelope and have these big goals that nobody thought was possible, and to get maybe all the way there because people want to go with you.
Well, thank you. And that was your great colleague and friend, Mitch Gerson, your CIO. Yeah. And Mitch is going through family going through a really tough season. So that question is from the heart in a really deep way. And, Mitch, and for you, Marianne, my mug today, Matthew 28:20, I am with you always. So don't forget that, Mitch. You mentioned Mr. Farazi again. And when we were together the last time, we did the sweet and sour, right? Where we get vulnerable, and we talked about leadership today, how it's changed. And I told Keith, I love the Andy Grove book, Only the Paranoid Survive. I told Keith his next book should be Only the Vulnerable Survive.
Yeah, facts.
Right.
Yeah.
Speaking of Keith, I'm not going to give any hints to our next mystery questioner, but I do have one more for you. So
okay.
Check this one out. See if you recognize this voice.
Hi there, Marianne. I first met you when I was facilitating an advisory board at Anthropic. Subsequently, I met you at the Radical Innovators Collaborative meeting in New York. And then again, we spent a good bit of time at Davos. One of the things that I've absolutely seen and recognized and been lifted by is your curiosity and your generosity. I'm curious right now, what is it that you are most interested in changing in the world, and how are you going about doing it? I ask this question because I know that you've got to have a list, as you always do, and you're always so active, always so curious, always so generous. I want to hear right now, and I'm sure the listeners do, what's at the top of your list?
Yeah, so it is Keith Farazi, and if anybody has not had the Farazi effect, you deserve to have that. One of the most consequential people I've met in my life, and came at the right point in time. So what's interesting about the curiosity is thinking about this change. I mean, I don't know that if you're listening and you haven't really paid attention, or if you're partially into understanding what's happening, like the whole world just changed. Like everything is changing. Business models, how work gets done, how you will live your day-to-day life in the future. What influences that life? What influences your ability to earn income? Where are the moral lines of what you allow artificial intelligence to do and what you don't? The questions are way, 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 way bigger than even any one business and how that business is transforming. My list right now is to partner with my leadership team at Cox to drive such a platform to set ourselves up for the future to meet the needs of our customers, to change the landscape of automotive, to set this company up for years and years to come, because this is one of the best companies I've ever seen in my life. And so to have that company have the next 125 years to be viable, that's what I wake up and think about all day long. When I lay down at night and I think about broader outside of my Cox bubble, I think about responsible AI. I think about, and I just called Keith on this the other day. I was just laying in bed at night thinking about, like, I don't really think a lot of CEOs and boards have a grip on what has changed. And I don't know that they know what to go do. And I know that there's a lot that do, but I think there's more that don't than do right now. And so I also have this map that we talked about earlier in the back of my head saying, like, I want to go prove how it can be done for my first love, which is Cox. But I want to do it in such a way that, it's universal for any business in any vertical as well. Because yes, it'll be very specific to our data and our moat and how we help automotive and how we play our role in automotive. But I don't think it'll be unique. I think that map will be a map that you could apply to almost any business vertical. And what is the top of that list is doing it the right way. And making sure it's done where there's no harm, but it's going back to that abundance mindset. I like the word that Elaine used, a maximizer, like, how do we do it that way in that abundance mindset, but do it safely and responsibly? And there has to be a map to that. And I think that map is still being charted. And that is the top of my list, and how I'm doing it today and how I think I'll do it in the future chapters of my life.
Incredible. Well, clearly you still have a lot to do.
Yes.
People keep asking, I'm of that age too. They're like, hey, when are you going to retire? I'm like, there's no way. There's just, if you talk to Keith, he's like, dude, I got 20 years. Like, there's a lot to do right now. He's about our age too. So
yes, seasoned. Barry McCarthy, since we talked about him today, he said once to me, and if he's listening, he said he was so seasoned, he was salty. We're seasoned well.
Oh my gosh. Well, Marianne, I want to put a big bow on this with our Tech for Good scholarship. And I think this is going to really resonate with you on so many levels. And, you've talked a lot about leadership and how it creates business value, but you really helped us see the value and the need, the responsibility, the opportunity to create human value on so many levels. And so this is all about gifting a scholarship to our TechLX leadership program. It's we've had 40 STEM nonprofits be the beneficiaries so far. We had no idea that this would become more than $500,000 of commitment. So what a gift and blessing that has been. But of all the organizations that you support and are participating in, is there one that stands out that you'd like to gift the scholarship to?
Yeah, there is a lot of amazing organizations out there, but having been the only woman in the room the majority of my career, Girls with Code stands out to me. So when I think about the future leaders that are going to continue these breakthroughs of in the STEM field and STEAM field, I would love to see even more women and girls stay the course in that and be part of that journey. And so that's such an outstanding organization. So that's who I would love to have you do that for. So thank you for that opportunity.
Amazing. I think they might be the most gifted Tech for Good recipient because of the great work. So yeah, great call on that one. Thank you for that, Marianne. Well, I literally, even as we've been going through this, I have pages of notes. It was there's so much here. I'm going to go back and listen again. I encourage everyone to do that. I would almost encourage leaders to take your team through this and as a study group, break it up into chunks and really unpack this with the teams, because thank you so much for being so open, transparent. This is hard work. These are hard times. It's messy. And you just gave us the map. You gave us the playbook.
And there's maps under the maps, right?
Maps under the maps. So, I'm going to leave everybody with this as you go with your day, as you're going through these decisions. Just keep asking yourself, what would Marianne do? So
Thank
with
you,
that,
Ken.
thank you so much. It's always good to be with you. Well, yes, indeed, that just happened. We just got an inside look at one of the best modern playbooks you'll need for these times, and with a leader who's leading the way with new strategies, new mindsets, the right questions we should be asking today. And really, with Marianne, I think what you saw was a new style of leadership that includes having grit and tenacity, go after those big, bold challenges, go to places we've never been to where there is no map. She taught us about having a growth mindset, which she called an abundance mentality. She talked about grace, giving grace to other people, but also giving grace to ourselves. And fourth, G, these all happen to be G. She talked about demonstrating gratitude, practicing gratitude every day. So thank you, Marianne, for giving us that secret sauce. And I'm just as excited about the CI.com article that we're about to work on together, where we're going to unpack more of her brilliance. And you're going to want to read this article because we covered things like the Chief Product and Technology Officer role, how to prepare for it, how to be successful in it, and what are the incredible benefits that Cox Automotive and others are seeing from having that role. She introduces the idea and the need to have a control plane in an agentic world. Fascinating thinking there. We talked a lot about preparing our organization and our people for this journey. And what she says is giving them choices and giving them voices, which I really appreciated. And last, she talked about a new role. And I'm curious if any of you are have a role like this or similar. She calls it the product creator. So check out the article, and you're going to appreciate, again, kind of like the executive MBA of succeeding today. So I'm going to leave it right there. You all be well. Go back and listen to this again. Please share it out. There's so much goodness here, and we will see you next time.